All the right-wing psychologists are in this room, sitting in this chair.
This is Dr. Jordan B Peterson, a Canadian psychologist and a thinker, the author of the book 12 Rules for Life and a YouTuber. What he just said was a joke, which I have to mention because the sense of humor begins to die out recently. September 2016, Peterson created a series of videos in which he meticulously criticized the Bill C-16. From that time on, there wasn't a lot of time for rest for him. The protests started an avalanche of interviews, debates and articles, first in Canada itself and then everywhere else. His book has achieved the status of a worldwide bestseller. What was it all about? A good question. Probably there was more to it than just the Bill C-16, which is a minor amendment to the Canadian Code of Human Rights, which guarantees protection against discrimination on the grounds of identity and gender expression. Executive instructions for the Human Rights Committee have imposed on university lecturers of the province of Ontario the requirement for the professors to use pronouns appropriate for the student-chosen gender identity. If you think that such details don't deserve attention, well, I would just like to remind you that 1,000 years ago the dispute about understanding of a single word, filioque, broke Christianity in half. If you do not know what's going on with all this expression and identity, do not worry, nobody knows what's going on. Since the time of C-16, the media have helped Peterson to gain global popularity, especially the media that hated him, those that portrayed Peterson as a mad, frustrated misogynist, commanding an army of online trolls. The real Peterson is a little bit more complicated than that and a lot nicer. Some, and when I say some I mean half of YouTube, think of him as some sort of a hero. All the confusion around the Bill C-16 could be a base for a good movie, or at least a trailer. Something like this, for example.
Free speech is the mechanism by which we keep our society functioning. It's a consequence of free speech and the ability to speak. People can put their finger on problems, articulate what those problems are, solve them, and come to a consensus. And we risk losing that. And we have to be able to say what we have to say badly, or we won't be able to think at all. And I know where that leads. I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
That's pure narcissism at work, by the way. These people are not your friends. Mark my words. That's the sounds of the barbarians pounding at the gates.
Jordan Peterson, trending #1 on Twitter. Jordan Peterson with an international bestseller. This is what I'm saying to you. Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man, and you're gonna get us right.
Jesus, last year, 200 of my fellow faculty members signed a petition to get me fired. That was only one of a dozen things that happened. The university wrote me 2 letters, 2 cease and desist letters from their HR departments with their legal staff. 3 of those and you're done. There was plenty of motivation to take me out. It just didn't work.
A bit too much with the music, too much pathos and emotions? Well, sure, yes. But I played with this montage for 2 reasons. First, because I can, and second, because Peterson's opponents have made this game much easier for me. Let's, for example, look at the first situation here.
Well, as you can see, the opponents of free speech are capable of making a lot of inarticulate noise. All right, so I want to tell you a couple of things about what this isn't about as far as I'm concerned. Right. I'm not going to talk about sexual politics. It's not my primary concern. What I'm going to talk about is freedom of speech, and I want to tell you a few things about freedom of speech, okay? Because I've been thinking about this very carefully. I've been thinking about this very carefully over the last 2 weeks. And it's partly because of the videos that I've made.
I thought you don't like cops, though.
But also because...
This nonsense. He's brilliant. For real. He's brilliant.
Okay, let's try this again. Right. So there's a reason I'm defending freedom of speech. And the reason for that is quite straightforward. The reason I'm defending freedom of speech is because that's how people with different opinions settle their opinions in a civil society. And if we think
As you can see, this flashy speech was not planned at all. A group of young activists tried to hold down Peterson until one of his students, certainly also a frustrated misogynist, decided to simply unplug the speaker, and Dr. Jordan began to improvise without a microphone. The clip I used at the moment has 614,000 views, but there were several other cameras at the event, the recordings from which were also uploaded somewhere on the internet, and the comments on YouTube were not particularly favorable to the activists. However, after a year, a picture from this very event was used in a very creative way. In Peterson's neighborhood, these posters appeared. Yeah, you know, I should probably read a few passages from this, but I do have so many questions. What did Peterson's stance on C16 have to do with Islam? Like really? Or women's rights? Or people of color? Nothing, like zero. Who thinks like this? In addition, it was 2017 already. Every Canadian and their dogs knew something about Peterson at that time. All the C16 scandal, including the Canadian Senate hearing, was old news that can be easily researched on the internet. Nobody could have fallen for this. His protests did not have anything to do with taking away the human rights from anyone. The original videos with his detailed explanations are in the description, but they are also articulated in a much more brief manner in the first C16 debate at Toronto University in November 2016.
You present your issue with Bill C16 to be that the infringement of freedom of expression regarding gender pronouns is a problem. Do you hold the same stance with other discriminatory language in the Human Rights Code, such as being able to use racist terms with regard to students? And if you believe that one of these things is a violation but not the other one, why? I'm not sure I read that out all that well, but you get the idea.
Okay, well, so one thing I would like to point out before I answer that, just so you all notice, is that I have in fact been denounced today. And what I am saying has in fact been described as hate propaganda. So one thing I'd like to suggest to you, every single person in the audience, you're next. So keep it in mind. I've been thinking about the pronoun thing, you know, because one of the things that people, it put me back on my heels for a while, because the claim was basically, well, it's something like, why doesn't the mean professor just play nice and respect people by using their pronouns? And it took me like 3 weeks to unpack that, because who gets questioned about pronoun use? I don't know why the hell I use the pronouns I use. I use them because they're part of the language. I use he and she because that's what everyone uses. And so then I had to think about, well, why Why do we in fact use pronouns? And we use them in part for the same reason that we use other categories, and that's to simplify the world for functional purposes, roughly speaking. But then I was thinking, well, is the use of he and she a mark of respect? And the answer to that is, well, no, it's not a mark of respect. It can't be a mark of respect. What you call 4 billion people can't be a mark of respect, right? It's a mark of basic categorization. And so then the claim comes up, well, if someone wants you to use a particular pronoun, then you're disrespecting them if you don't. It's like, okay, let's think that through a bit. Well, that assumes that when I'm using he or she for people in normal parlance, that I'm actually indicating my respect for them. And that's not true.
Why do you feel that someone's personal gender identity and pronouns infringes your free speech? Can one not also argue, based on your interpretation, that professors can use racial slurs in their classroom and that the inability to do so would violate their freedom of speech?
Well, that's pretty much the same question, I think. I think that we're crossing a dangerous line, and the line is the requirement that's being put upon people by government agencies with the full force of the law behind them. You're not supposed to interrupt.
Actually, I was just going to ask if you could go back to the point about the analogy between the racial slur and the
I don't think there's any
use.
analogy at all.
But
I
that's
think
what
the difference
people wanna
between,
hear you
I'm
on.
talking about compelled speech. There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
It is worth mentioning that this outburst was a result of 1.5 hour long debate during which Peterson had to answer quite a few questions implying his racism. It had to be quite exhausting to him. Seeing him taking off his jacket is a true rarity. I would also like to point out the applause. Either the room was full of right-wing extremists or he said something at least some students and professors were waiting for. One thing he didn't do was promoting hatred towards anybody on any grounds, especially not racial. How come the activists insisted for a full year on their racism accusations? Nobody knows that. It is a mystery. There is no rational explanation for that unless you define racism as everything our side doesn't like. These kind of foggy arguments can work short term maybe, but in the long run they can't win you any debate. So in the end the activists have given up. One of the last clashes between Peterson and the activists occurred during the Queen's University debate, March 2018, during which Peterson made a lot of controversial remarks, such as this, for example.
Imagine that we define the socio-political landscape in terms of identity politics, which is happening very rapidly. In fact, we're compelled to do so, right? So, well then what happens is you get activity on the identity politics front on the left and on the right. The left says, well, the oppressed shall rise and take their rightful place. And the right says, yeah, over my dead body, and probably yours too. So as soon as we play the identity politics game, that's where we're at. And we start playing it by accepting the terminology.
So the activists from the International Peacekeepers group came there, made a lot of noise and disbanded. And the debate just went on. It was already quite clear they can't achieve anything with these methods. The only result of these actions was bringing new viewers and subscribers to Peterson's channel. The responsibility over fending off the naughty Canadian psychologists, well, one psychologist, was already in the hands of the journalists. And to this day, they seem to employ tactics very similar to the activist propaganda, well, activist approach. they present Peterson in a way that is so far removed from reality and sometimes plainly arrogant that the only possible result may be bringing new fans to Peterson's fold. So, a shining example of this, the British Channel 4 Cathy Newman conducted a very famous interview with Jordan Peterson. A famous interview, analyzed from every possible angle, inciting some vivid reactions. It's quite possible that Peterson would never achieve the status of a worldwide intellectual star without this interview. I would encourage you to watch it from start to finish if you haven't already. I won't talk about it in great detail because, as I said, soon enough you will be able to find an in-depth analysis of this interview even in your own darn fridge. I would mention though that Channel 4 broadcasted a short version of the interview, edited so that Peterson would look as horrible as possible, given the source material of course. There's a lot to achieve with editing alone, as I tried to show you in my little teaser trailer there. Nonetheless, for some bizarre reason, they also decided to upload the full interview on YouTube. Miss Newman conducted a very stalwart tactics of repeating a single phrase with each question. That phrase was, "so you're saying," and here insert some nonsense that has nothing to do with what he said. She used that formula approximately 27 times, so almost once per minute. Unfortunately, for most of the 2 or 3 million viewers in the first weekend, it was pretty obvious that Peterson never said things she said he said.
So you were saying that by and large, women are too agreeable to get the pay rises they deserve?
No, I'm saying that that's one component of a multivariate equation that predicts salary.
You're saying, that's what you're really saying. You're saying you talk about successful women, though, basically have to wear the trousers, in your view. You're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run these top companies?
No, I didn't say that at all.
You said that you got in trouble for refusing to call trans men and women by their preferred personal pronouns.
No, that's not actually true.
I mean, you are a provocateur.
I never said
You're like
anything.
the alt-right that you hate to be compared to. You're saying that we should organise our societies along the lines of the lobsters.
I really
the
think
patriarchal system
I really
is
think
just
that's
fine.
silly. I do. I think that's silly. I really do.
And so the strategy of quote-unquote progressive activists splashed all over the public debate. And as was the case with the scandal around the C16, it was only providing Peterson with new arguments and examples. In the solitude of his own office, he might have had an opportunity to congratulate himself. Well, another beautiful and well-structured smear attack on Peterson and his line of thinking happened in the New York Times itself, May 2018. The author of this particular article spent 2 days with Jordan Peterson. She had a chance for a very, very long interview. Given the circumstances, it's interesting how few quotes from Peterson himself made it to the finished text. One of the very few quotes later became another internet bomb. The quote was about the supposedly rising level of aggression in young males. He said that traditionally speaking, the response to high levels of aggression was enforced monogamy. Now, the meaning of the word enforced is context dependent and vague. But of course, some of the left-wing media grabbed the most horrific meaning possible and used it as a weapon. And again, we had Twitter exploding in a lot of general backlash. And unfortunately again, every internet user who knows how to do YouTube was able to search for Dr. Peterson's horribly sexist remarks and find nothing but some pondering on how monogamy first came about and a few remarks about traditional marriage being generally a good idea. No call for forcing women into anything though. You can derive his ideas pretty easily from knowing anything basically about ancient history and ancient culture, psychology and/or ethnography. You could also find a link to a pretty important sociological research pointing at the relation between the level of aggression and sexual frustration in young males. The entire New York Times article deserves a separate analysis, for which we don't really have the time or the resolve or strength, or really, I just don't want to delve in it. For now, I can only share a vague impression that there is not a single line there that wouldn't serve the goal of proving a preemptively formulated thesis articulated so well in the title itself. Jordan Peterson, Custodian of Patriarchy.
What the hell is that? Oh my god, is that the patriarchy?
Speaking of preemptively proving your axiomatic emotional statements, December last year, the whole chaos around Jordan arrived to my doorstep, so to say, in my beautiful country, Poland. It came in the shape of a very smear-like article in Political Critique, a left-wing Polish opinion magazine, let's say. It was a review. Well, it wasn't really a review, but it claimed to be a review of 12 Rules for Life. The book wasn't even a subject. The subject was Jakub Majmurek, the author of the text, being mad at Jordan Peterson for daring to say things that Jakub Majmurek wouldn't like to hear. And of course Majmurek clinged to the enforced monogamy thing, even though it was already, well, old news. He also translated it into Polish into something like forced monogamy. Why, well, okay, I assume you, listeners, use English, right? You are probably better at English than I am, since, you know, you are watching this in English. You can spot the difference between forced and enforced, right? Of course, the word enforced doesn't really have a direct translation into Polish, and that's another problem when you write about Peterson in my native language. But there's so much you can do with that word before you jump directly to bloody forced. Given the context, something like expected, like socially expected, let's say, would be probably better. Maybe something like normative would be the best, but it wouldn't really 100% confirm Majmurek's assumptions, so why bother? Someone could Google the word normative, well, that would be a catastrophe. Majmurek used the same network of associations that has been used since the Bill C-16 protest, the fictional association between Peterson, alt-right, sexism and racism. But it was even funnier than the usual buzz. Majmurek conveniently refused to acknowledge the more level-headed left-wing reactions to Peterson. He wrote that Peterson was widely criticized by broadly defined left-wing circles. Really? How broadly defined? Jakub? The Guardian wrote more about Peterson than just plain smear pieces. Slavoj Zizek went from a very dismissive initial reaction to something more balanced and debate-ready over the years. How broad your definition of left-wing really is. And I'm not saying that to attack poor Jakub Majmurek. I'm saying that because I'd like people of Majmurek's sensibility, let's say, to try and formulate their ideas with more precision. Otherwise, we will just throw poop at each other without end. Furthermore, within Majmurek's thing, because it wasn't a review, there was a link to that Cathy Newman Peterson interview. Like it wasn't quite obvious for a year that this interview only helps Peterson's popularity. Why, oh why would you try to portray Peterson in the worst possible light, yet still decide to give him free advertisement? I beg you, really, I beg, if you really have to attack him, could you at least don't do it in a way that undermines your own positions? Jesus. I know, I'm getting a little bit emotional. These emotions made me write a little letter to Political Critique. It was just before Christmas. I've got a reply saying that they are not interested in publication, and you see, the problem is, I really wasn't that much interested in bloody publication either. Now that I think of it, the most important thing I had to say was what I just said here. Put your arguments in some sort of order, because for now the only thing you do is strengthening Peterson and compromising the left, generally speaking, the progressives, people you think you represent. Personally, I don't mind making Peterson stronger, but you know how it goes. You win too much and you get cocky and you start making mistakes. It would be better in the long run for Peterson and for his opponents if this radical criticism became more orderly and grounded in something more than your inarticulated axioms and hurt feelings. For now, however, there are some reasons to believe that the media reaction to Peterson can be put in some sort of order. The Guardian's YouTube channel started a series, let's say, concerning the modern masculinity issues discussed widely and broadly by Peterson, for example. It looks like it can go without smears and screams and all that for a while. There was that pretty relevant and pretty important, although in my opinion not really successful, debate between Peterson and Zizek. Of course, Jakub Majmurek, my, beloved kinsman, wrote a short commentary on the debate in the Political Critique. He was disappointed with the fact that Peterson wasn't destroyed or educated a bit more, but at least Majmurek wasn't as angry and delusional as he was in his December hit piece. He just thought Peterson is intellectually inferior. Well, that's okay, I don't agree, but that's okay. As a fan of Peterson, I am perfectly ready to admit that his success comes not only from his intellectual ability, but also from rhetorical prowess and unparalleled stubbornness. And also, in no small part at all, from that wave of unthoughtful, chaotic, baseless critique repeated ad nauseum by some left-wing media.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
Are you flirting with me, Dr. Peterson?
Well, not intentionally.
Oh,
you are
boy.
very attractive, though.
I feel so great.
You got a short one?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, a question?
Saved the best question for last. Trust me, this one's good. But first, I'll break the ice. Many people have...
Okay, you explain it, man. You explain why, 3 million people have watched the U of T free speech rally, and I think 7 million people downloaded the Joe Rogan podcast, and it's crazy. It's crazy. There was 180 newspaper articles about this. It was news for 4 months. Why? Who cares what I think? God, I don't even care that much about what I think.
I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to because it's just so goddamn funny. I can't help but say it. I figured out how to monetize social justice warriors.
That is what it is.
I know, it's so funny. I just can't believe it. If they let me speak, then I get to speak, and then more people support me on Patreon. It's that's annoying. It's goddamn capitalists make more money off this ideological warfare. It's okay, fine, let's go protest it. So they go protest me, and then that goes up on YouTube, and then my Patreon account goes way up. So it's they don't know what to do.